So just to start to say that the point of tonight's session is really, it's an information session to give you an overview of the program and to really answer any of the questions that you might have. So we'll talk a little bit, we'll want to introduce the program, talk a little bit about what you can expect in terms of curriculum, funding, and all the rest of that. But then we'll throw it open and really just have an open Q&A session and make it as interactive as possible. So for you to, ask questions, you can put them into the chat. Lisa will be monitoring the chat. If I'm busy with the PowerPoint, you can raise your hand. Anything is fine. We can make it as casual and as interactive as possible. I see most of you have your microphones turned off. That's great. If you want to ask a question, obviously do so, but otherwise it's probably good to leave that off. I'll introduce myself and then Lisa will. So as mentioned, I'm Blake Fitzpatrick. I'm the program director. I teach in the School of Image Arts in the undergrad program and also in the documentary media program, which is a graduate program. I'm former chair of the School of Image Arts, and I've been involved in this PhD program for about 6 years. When at an earlier point, I was the interim graduate associate dean of our faculty, which is the Creative School, formerly FCAD. And back then we realized that there was a real need for a practice-based doctoral program. That's to say that we wanted a program to develop a program that would appeal to the kinds of students we were working with at the master's level. These are students who are creative practitioners, who want an advanced educational experience that puts creativity at the heart of learning, an opportunity for scholarship and for practice-based ideas to be developed, and really to work in an interdisciplinary context. And really that's what this program's about. And also, of course, to provide an opportunity to earn a PhD degree with a practice focus, which is really the unique thing about this particular program. Our program launched this year. We have 7 full-time students. We have 2 part-time students. We had a number of people apply last year, so we're coming into our second round of recruitment. And if last year was any indication, that we really think there's a pent-up need for this because we had quite a number of applicants last year, and we were really happy about that. So we're excited to really start that whole process off again and to meet with you and tell you about the program, answer any of the questions that you might have. Lisa, do you want to say a few things about your role and yourself?
Sure. Hi, everyone. I'm Lisa, and I'm the graduate program administrator for the MDI. That means I'm here to answer any questions that you have about administrative requirements, admissions processes, any questions that you have regarding the program whatsoever. Feel free to send me an email. It's an exciting program. I've been working with Blake since the inception, and it's really exciting. And I'm happy to have you here tonight. Hope you get something from this.
And we're also joined tonight by Daniel Garcia. Daniel's the manager of grad programs administrator. And you want to just say a few words, Daniel?
Yeah, thank you, Blake. Hello, everyone. Just saying hello, and same as Lisa. Anytime you have a question or have any admissions, you trying to figure out the process of how to actually go through the application things, or in general, pretty much any first point questions, we are sort of your team to help you out. So we're really excited with the program, of course. And like Blake mentioned, we had lots of interest last year, so we look forward to your applications. You already take the first step being here, probably ahead of the game for a lot of other people who couldn't make it, but that's great. Hence we have the recording, so a lot of people can catch up, but that's fantastic. So again, really excited to have you guys. And again, if you need to reach out or anything, I'll leave my email in the chat for you guys to have it as well. Thank you.
Thanks, Daniel. Okay, so I'll start with a PowerPoint presentation. I'll just share my screen, and it's a fairly brief presentation to kind of go over and give you an overview of the program. And then, as I said, we'll sort of throw it open and really have largely a Q&A session driven by your questions. So let me just get the screen share going here. Good. Okay, so as mentioned, I'm Blake Fitzpatrick and the program director. of the Media and Design Innovation PhD program in the Creative School. This is a faculty-wide interdisciplinary creative practice PhD program, and we think it offers an entirely unique creative focus and a creative practice focus. So just a little bit about the program. It is Ryerson's first practice-based PhD program, and it's the Creative School's first PhD. We began the program this year in September with our first cohort of students. We have, I would say, a key point of differentiation between this program and other PhD programs is that students can study on a full-time or part-time basis. So we have in this first class, you know, 7 full-time students, 2 part-time, and we'll probably look at 4 to 6 full-time students going forward and a couple of part-times as well. It is a faculty-wide PhD, which means that students have access to a full range of labs within our faculty, the Creative School. We have a dedicated home in a space called the Catalyst. And the Catalyst is located in the Rogers Communications Center. It really is the faculty's primary research center. So it will be the sort of home base for the PhD, very high profile center, lots of really interesting research groups all around within the Catalyst, and a lot of interesting things happening there. So a lot of events take place that are research driven. And so it's kind of like research central for our school. But there's other labs as well. There's the Creative Innovation Studio, which is on Bond Street, a relatively new space to do things, and there's many events taking place there. There's also the Design and Technology Lab, which is a sort of state-of-the-art, very high-tech space that has all sorts of equipment. You can see the massive robotic arm in these shots here, but it has large-scale 3D printers, CNC equipment, large flatbed 4x8 foot printers, all sorts of high-end equipment. So the point is that when you're you know, a student within the Creative School, you basically have access to all the facilities that the Creative School has. So these are some of the sort of newer facilities, the more high-end facilities as well. So this is really, as I probably have said a few times now, a very unique program. One of the things that makes it so unique is that it's practice-led. So practice-based experiential education speaks really to the Creative School's strengths and I think its identities. The point here is that creative practice is a mode of research, and it also is a mode of research with its own methodologies. And that's one of the unique aspects of the curriculum, which I'll get to in a second. We offer, for example, a course in practice-based research methods, which is a kind of an emerging field in scholarship, you know, both from a scholarly point of view and a practice point of view. A number of people are starting to think about what creative practice means and how it can be a form of research all by itself. So within this program, the creative project is the dissertation project. And of course, creative work doesn't exist in a vacuum. So doctoral students will contextualize their work in a 3,000 to 4,000 word paper, approximately 80 pages or 100 pages in that ballpark there. And the paper will examine questions of methodology that were part of the process in the project that people were building and doing. It'll help pose larger cultural questions, issues, needs, histories to which the project is referring and responding to. So we can really think about, you know, the kinds of things that go into the paper as being part of the relevance of the project that gets described. The other sort of unique thing I think about this program is that students in the program affiliate with one of the schools within the Creative School. So there's 9 separate schools in the Creative School. They're all engaged in creative practices of one sort or another. They're engaged with the creative industries. And there are 7 master's programs. And essentially what will happen is that you'll have a supervisor who's located in one of those schools, and you'll be an affiliate of that school. You'll be the school's PhD student. And what that really means in practical terms is that you will have quite potentially research assistantships or graduate assistantships with, faculty in that school. And you're sort of be one of the sort of lead people to kind of work within the school and to, and they may, and if that school has kind of facilities that are relevant to your project, you will have access to those facilities as well. So you're really a kind of almost adjunct student within the school. And as I said, you sort of follow the supervisor in terms of where they happen to be located. So the curriculum of the program, here's a map. First of all, there's 4 required courses and 2 electives in the program of study. In the first year, the doctoral colloquium really starts it all off and introduces students to the study of media and design through key texts and classes with invited members from the creative industries, from the creative school, faculty, as well as the larger cultural sector. So arts representatives from industry, from government, artists, all sorts of people kind of come into that program. And really sort of that's the point of it, is to kind of meet the community on some level. There's 2 research courses in the first year. First of all, there's the Qualitative Research Methods course. But at the same time, in the winter semester, there's the Practice-Based Research Methods course. So we have almost like a traditional, academic research methods course, which does put everything into a kind of practice-based context. So there's a real focus on, for example, research creation methodologies. And then there's a practice-based research methods course, which I said before is really this sort of emerging field right now. Also in the spring is a directed reading course, and the directed reading is constructed by the supervisor and the student together. And it's designed to build a body of knowledge that is relevant to the dissertation project. So it kind of feeds into the second year when you start thinking more about comprehensive exams and what goes on that way. So when you come around to the, there's also, I should say, 2 electives. There's three places where you can take electives, but you only take 2. These are electives that are within the existing master's programs, or you can take other electives sort of really across the university by swapping them out. You can also replace the electives with an internship. Up to 2 of the electives can be, traded out for an internship as well. The last 2 years of the program are really time for research and development. This is kind of the more open end of the program of studies, which gives you the time to be working on your project, your independent project, as well as the writing and everything else, and working with a supervisory team. Coming out of that, here's just an example of some of the careers that people might go into. They're very diverse, and the point is that this is really just a very partial list, but it gives some indication of really the kinds of fields that people will likely be going or heading towards. And these are sort of mirroring the kinds of things that are happening within the creative school at the master's level. So it's, sort of following one to another. But again, this is just a kind of a snapshot, and really, I think it's as wide as it can be in terms of where people might go after the program is complete. What kind of careers are people looking for? Again, very, very open in terms of where they might be going. The point is, though, that this is really a particular program. And so, for example, a lot of people do a PhD because they want to go into teaching. They want to go into the academy. And this is certainly suitable for that, but it'd be particularly suitable for university or college institutions that have a practice focus. So typically all colleges have a practice focus, but some universities like Ryerson, for example, has that kind of focus as well. So it'd be that kind of place that people would be going. But there's also, other kinds of creative industries out there, other kinds of media and design industries, government, independent work as artist curators and media makers of all sorts. So in terms of admissions, the requirements are these, that, and this is, I should say, all on the website. So I'll just go over this rather quickly, but we can talk about this, and I'm sure we will when we get to the Q&A part of the whole thing. You start with a statement of intent, which is about 500 to 1,000 words, a couple of pages. And the point of this is to give an idea of what it is that you are planning to do. What is the intention of your reason for going into doctoral studies? This gives us an indication too of whether we can really support your project idea, whether we have the faculty to support it, whether it's within the sort of realm of what we imagine this program to be. So it gives us a real sense of what you want to do, and that's useful for us to know, how we can support that or not. You also have your curriculum vitae, your CV, which gives us a sort of background on you. 2 letters of recommendation, one from an academic source, and well, they both could be from an academic source, but one has to be. And that's because, academics understand the context of a advanced degree, and so they can speak to that more clearly than, let's say, a colleague that you might be working with. And I realize sometimes that's a bit of a problem because, last year, for example, we had people coming into the program who had been out of school for maybe 10 or 15 years. And, the thought of going back to get a professor who may or may not remember them to write a reference letter was daunting. We can talk about that, case by case, but as I said, it is kind of our requirement to have that if we can get it. Because we do know that these people understand the context that's behind it all. Transcripts, of course, from other degrees that you have, and examples of work. So we asked for 2 examples of work, or 2 samples of work, one written and one a creative sample. The creative sample, again, it can be very, very wide in terms of what that is. And we have a very sort of liberal definition of creativity and what creative work can be. So it doesn't necessarily have to be, thought of as fine art or, a film or anything like that. But it can be some kind of creative demonstration that maybe comes out of the workplace that you're employed in. But we want to see some indication of creativity within the project or a creative solution to a problem. And we also want to see something of a written sample. And that gives us an idea of how you express yourself and also typically what you're interested in. Some people and that could be a published piece of some sort, but it doesn't have to be. So often people will, maybe produce an excerpt from a chapter in their master's thesis or a chapter or something like that. It does say here that, what would be an ideal scenario is that some of what you're bringing forward in the way of examples of work, either at the creative or the written side of that, has some bearing or connection to what you're proposing to do in terms of your statement of intent. It doesn't necessarily have to be that. It's just, I think it's sort of helpful to give us a sense that you have a background that can support that idea. And that you've been doing research work or you've been doing some sort of work that is in the area that you want to pursue as a doctoral student so that you have background to draw from. That's why I think that's the ideal scenario. The other thing is that we ask that you have, that you locate a faculty supervisor at the point of application. So we have on our website, a faculty page. When you click on any of these names, a bio comes up and it gives some really fairly good indication of what the sort of research interests of the faculty member is. I would recommend that you spend some time with that page and read through it, figure out who within the faculty is doing work that is relevant to the proposed research that you would like to do, where there might be a match. And where you see that, reach out to the people. Ask them, email them, ask them for a Zoom meeting. The people that are on that faculty list all want to supervise. That's why they're there. They're interested in working with students. So, you don't have to be shy about that. They expect people to be reaching out to them. They are interested in, making connection with, incoming potential students, people that can work with them. And there's a real, when you go through that, you'll see there's a real range of possibility here. The faculty is very deep in terms of the kind of, the rigorous research that some of these people are engaged with and are very known for. They're renowned. At the same time, it's wide in terms of, the kind of expertise that's within the creative school. So there's lots of different people, lots of different interests, lots of different expertise. And so, your role is to sort of find somebody and match with them. And then in your statement of intent, you say that you've been in touch with Professor whoever, Charles Davis, who is interested in supervising you. And that helps us when we're looking at the applications to know that, okay, there's a connection here. And you've taken the time to sort of reach out and make that connection. And if we might need to sort of be in touch with that professor to get sort of follow-up information, but it's very helpful for us to know that. So so take the time to kind of take a look at that faculty page and find somebody who would potentially be interested in working with you. In terms of funding, there's 4 years of funding guaranteed, and for the first year, $20,000 is the minimum funding. Now that $20,000 comes from a number of sources. We expect people to apply for graduate assistantships, working with faculty in the schools, research assistantships. There's funding that comes from the program itself. There's funding that comes from the Yates School of Graduate Studies, so sort of, the grad school. But at the same time, we'll be expecting you to be applying for certain scholarships and awards. And there's a list here of what some of those awards are. Some of those are automatically considered just at the point of, when you've been admitted to the program, you go into the pool that is competing for example, Ontario graduate scholarships. And some of it is scholarships that you have to apply for yourself. And we put on, workshops on how to apply for SSHRC funding, and we encourage you and try to help you through that process as much as possible. And when you get that kind of funding, that if you had a $12,000 Ontario graduate fellowship, for example, we sort of essentially will top it up and also provide you with GA ships and all of that to sort of meet or exceed the $20,000 mark. And people who are generally getting the bigger funding packages, like, for example, the Ontario Graduate Scholarship, the OGS or SSHRC, we were topping up over and above so that they were getting, 25 to 30,000 with other things sort of added into it. So that, but we're guaranteeing at least the $20,000 mark. Okay, so now that's really the quick overview of the program. So now what I would suggest is we just I'll turn off the screen share, but we'll take questions. But just so you know, Lisa and I are available to answer questions afterwards. You can get in touch with us with our emails. They're on the website as well. And generally speaking, Lisa is the person to go to for administrative kinds of questions, things about the admissions process, documents and transcripts and things like that. I'm more to be sort of concerned about questions that are related to the curriculum, sort of, what happens within the program, that sort of thing. So, but do reach out to us because we're here for that, and happy to answer any questions. So let me stop with the screen share thing. And so we can just sort of really throw it open. Now we do have some questions in the chat. Should we start there? Oh, Theo, is there applications that should take place prior to the program application, or will that all be done pending admission? Lisa, do you want to take that?
What do you mean by applications though, Theo?
I suppose, I mean, in terms of SSHRC or OGS, would there be anything that we should be doing prior, or at the same time.
Okay, so OGS, OGF, and RGS you will be automatically considered, and that's based on admissions results that the committee devises, and then also based on other factors as well, but you will be automatically considered. There's nothing that you need to do. If there are supplementary forms, then I will be in contact with you to fill them out. But generally, those are you'll be automatically considered for all. If there are any other awards and scholarships outside of the program that have immediate deadlines, you'll have the link for that, and that's something that students need to check on their own. But for those in particular, yes, you will be automatically considered. There's nothing required of you at the time.
And you don't have to do any of that before the program or before being accepted into the program.
No.
Yeah. 7 schools affiliated with the program. Okay, I'll try to name them. Well, all of the schools within the creative school are in some ways potential schools for people to be affiliated with. But generally speaking, people will affiliate with schools that have graduate programs. And the schools that have the graduate programs, there's the School of Image Arts, there's professional communication, there is journalism, there's the RTA School of Media, there's creative industries, and there's, help me out here, Daniel.
Yeah, you got fashion, the School of Fashion.
Fashion, yeah.
I was going through the graphic communications management as well, but they don't have a grad program yet.
Right.
Interior design also doesn't have a grad program, and the School of Performance is also associated, and they do have a grad program as well.
Yeah. There's a couple new programs that are just emerging. One which started this year at the same time as the PhD program is a master's and MFA in screenwriting. And this is an interdisciplinary program shared by School of Image Arts, the School of Media, and Performance. And there's a couple of other programs that are sort of in the works that we hope to see come forward in the next few years. So how long is the full-time studies and part-time? That's an excellent question. Full-time study, 4 years of funding. Some people will take longer than that. But that's the sort of recommended time frame, and that is the funding package. Beyond that, you wouldn't be receiving funding. Part-time is really a much more open-ended kind of program of studies, and it really, the people who are interested in part-time study are often people who are working full-time, and because they're working full-time, they don't have the time to dedicate to full-time study, and it really depends on how much time they have to go through the program. But what we are recommending is 6 years for part-time study. And again, of course, it could be longer than that, but we're recommending 6 years. And the schedule for part-time study is very individual. So in other words, working with your supervisor as a part-time student, you'll figure out whether you want to take 2 courses in the first semester or just do 1, and really kind of fashion a program of study based on what your real needs are and the kind of time that you have to put in on it. How could you describe the part-time part? Yeah, I think. Chelsea asks, other than the listed examples on the website, published articles, report, thesis, are there any additional accepted forms of work? You may not have published work. Would be okay to submit an unpublished? Yes, indeed. Not everyone has published materials. So for example, you can submit unpublished work, as I said. It could be, for example, a chapter from your master's thesis, which may or may not be published. And acceptable forms of creative work, that's really a hard one to describe. I will say that, going through the application process, we were pretty liberal in a sense in terms of how we interpreted that. Obviously, some people will have fine art kind of portfolios that they put forward. So that's a sort of an obvious case. But it could be something that somebody even is coming from working in some kind of industry or institutional context, and they maybe, I don't know, they developed an app that met a particular need, and we can consider that a creative project on some level, or that they did something in the sense of putting on an event that was engaged with the creative industry or the arts or something like that. So we could consider that. Or they did a zine or a publication or some kind of web site that that they were chiefly responsible for designing. Well, we would consider that a creative work. So it's very, very wide open in terms of what that can be. And in a sense, when you're writing the statement of intent, you make a case for yourself. You say, one of the most important things I've done recently is this, and you can describe it. And that gives us a context to see it in those terms. So it's really, almost impossible to sort of make a list of what all those things can be, because really they're quite variable. And I think, again, that's one of the unique things about this program. It's as wide as the creative school is wide, and the creative school is very wide in terms of the kinds of things that go on and the various schools and disciplines that are represented. So, so you're really sort of talking to a very diverse kind of community. And what's creative in a school like Image Arts is a very different thing than what might be considered creative in performance, or what might be considered creative in journalism or in professional communication. So it's very, very sort of wide that way. But we want to see that you have some kind of creative capacity, and that's what you're really trying to put forward in the letter of intent. So I think I made it. I'll come back here. It's really flying now. The catch up, sorry. How does funding work for part-time studies? That's a very good question. Funding for part-time, people who go part-time are self-funded. So this is sort of the trade-off. If you're studying on a part-time basis, the typical reason for that is you have a full-time job. And you can't afford to leave your full-time job for any number of reasons. So for the most part, people who do the part-time study are self-funded. There's very little that can be done about that in terms of funding for them. So that's a very key decision for you to make in terms of whether you want to put that sort of bypass the funding so as to build in the time that you have so that you can maintain a job. Other people have asked, can you do this full-time as a student while maintaining a full-time job? I would say almost impossible. When you really get into it, a doctoral program is a full-time job. It doesn't seem it, because it looks like there's only 2 courses, and what's that, 6 hours, but really the kind of work that's coming out of those courses, and also the responsibility to be developing a research proposal and a research project and all the rest of that, and to be fully engaged in the doctoral program is much more than those 6 hours would seem to imply. And especially even when you look at the last 2 years and you think, there's no courses here. I mean, what's there to do? Well, there's the research. That's what there is to do. And that's really a full-time job. So I would say I wouldn't entertain the idea of trying to do both on a full-time basis. And it's really one of the key decisions that people make. And again, it is one of the sort of unique things about this program is that we do offer a part-time option. Many doctoral programs don't. So I'm just kind of taking these from the top. If anyone wants to jump in it with a question, that's fine too. How does the funding work for part-time? Did that? Would there be funding for creative materials pertaining to the PhD? That's a very good question. Usually the straight answer is yes and no. The program does not fund the work that you're doing, other than to say, though, that we do fund you. So there, the program has research funding that we award to students to enter the program, and there are other sort of ways of funding that are part of that for example, in the first year, $20,000 minimum funding package that we put together for you. So in a way, that money is yours to do as you have to do to support you in one way or another, but it could be turned into money to support the development of your project. Beyond that, we don't really have much in the way of like special project funding. And so that becomes really the responsibility of the student. Can a student switch from part-time to full-time? That's a good question as well. It's easier to switch from full-time to part-time because when we admit people, the program runs on a program budget, and that's really based on, a full-time, is what we would fund somebody in a full-time context. So if somebody is admitted on a part-time basis and then they say a year later they want to go full-time, our budget is not really allowed for that because we've taken our full cohort of full-time students already, and they're in that year that person is trying to transition to in a full-time way. So that's not usually allowed. On the other side, it is easier though to go from a full-time position to a part-time position because from a funding point of view, it's of a minimal impact for us because we don't have to find brand new money to fund somebody we hadn't counted on. So you can't really go, you can go one way, but not the other, is what I would say about that. Is there funding for creative materials? No, we've talked about that. Can you do that? Follow up for full-time studies. Only the first 2 years will be required classroom work. The next 2 years, the student can be on their own. Yes, that's right. I mean, that is essentially it. The last 2 years of the doctoral degree are more open-ended. You're working with a supervisory committee and your supervisor and typically 2 other people at that stage of the game. You're working on the research behind the project that you're doing and the making of the project, but you're also at the same time reading many things to help you really inform yourself on the area that you're researching, and then beyond that, the longer term goal of writing that paper. So that's really what that time is about. You're also probably doing graduate assistantships or research assistantships or other kinds of things. So you're not just sitting home. Like there's other things that are going on, but there's no dedicated classes for those last 2 years. Ida, you have your hand up.
Hello, hi everyone.
Hi.
I just want to ask a question about the supervisors and the supervisor's role. For example, if the supervisor were to change in the middle of, or something were to happen in the middle of your program, how is there accommodation for that? And also, if you think about the first cohort, how much would you say the factoring in terms of acceptance had to do with the strength of the supervisor with the role with the student? So in other words, would the supervisor have to really champion their application, or if you just had a conversation with them and said, hey, are you interested in this? And they said yes, would that be enough?
Yeah, okay, a couple of thoughts there. Supervisors changing during the program, that can happen for any number of reasons. People retire or they go somewhere else, or or maybe the fit isn't right. Or also sometimes what happens is that the student applies with an idea, and that person is matched with the supervisor whose research is most aligned with that. But then the student's idea shifts, all of a sudden is doing something else, and there might be other people who are more aligned with that new idea. So there's got to be some flexibility here. I mean, we want you to be successful. We want you to be working with someone who can support you. That's the bottom line. And so if things change and the project changes and all sorts of things like that, or all sorts of reasons come into it where all of a sudden that first supervisor, it's maybe not the ideal person, some kind of flexibility has to be put in place. But as well, I'll just say, you're also not just working with that one person, because you will have your primary supervisor. But once you really get going into the second year, you also have a supervisory committee. So there are other people. It's really a committee of 3 people. And there are other people that are bringing different kinds of expertise into the mix. In terms of the admission part of the whole thing, it's really not that the supervisors go to bat for somebody and, kind of win the day or anything like that. We put together an admissions committee drawn from the faculty broadly, so from different areas within the creative school. And they're looking collectively at all the applications that come in and really giving it quite close consideration. It's a big commitment to be on that committee. And then what happens is that, they make a selection of what they think are really the top applicants coming in. And then there's sort of a process of making sure that the supervisors who are put on the statement of intent are really interested in this person. So maybe we also want to know if they have funding for this person, that kind of thing. So there's a bit of back and forth between the committee and the people who are listed as the supervisors. Okay, so let's see. I don't know where I am on this. Would there be, yeah, I've done that.
When do offers of admissions begin?
Right. Well, the offers of admission, Lisa, you make the offers, but basically I would say that really the application deadline, first consideration deadline, is January 18th. We'll be meeting soon after that as a committee, as an admissions committee, really deliberating through February for the most part. So you'll start to see offers coming out at the beginning of March, really, I would say. Is that about right, Lisa, from your experience?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So, and we also, will be keeping the program open until we meet our quota. Now, last year we met it very quickly. Once we really started to, get ready to make offers, we had the people already. We didn't have to keep the program open much longer because we had met our full quota fairly quickly. But we will always keep it going until we have our quota. And how many courses would we be taking per semester full time? Well, again, if you look at that chart that I showed you, it depends on which semester you're in. So in the first semester of first year, there's 2 courses. In the second semester, there's only 1 required course, but then you could take an elective. So you have 2 electives to take, but there's 3 different semesters where you can take them in. So you may decide to take an elective in the winter semester or not. And then, in the winter semester, there's only 1 elective potentially to take. And then really in the second year, the number 1 responsibility for the second year is to prepare yourself for the comprehensive exams, wherein you write 3 different exams, they're take-home exams, short essays that are evaluated by your comps committee, which is also the supervisory committee. And once you get through that, you have to write your proposal. So this is where you will actually spend quite, typically, could be over the summer, or it could be, a month or so, to actually really draft what your proposal is. Now, you've been talking about it with the supervisor. It's not a brand new idea, but you have to be able to formulate it and really kind of put it into context that clarifies exactly what it is you want to do. And that has to be approved by your supervisory committee. So most of second year, in terms of the number of required courses you take, it looks very, very thin, but it's actually a very busy year because you're preparing for these exams. These are major exams, and at the same time, you're really getting your ideas straight for what will become the proposal. And you have to put your proposal forward before you can really start your research and have it accepted. So typically the proposal is coming in at the end of second year or the first semester of third year. And then once that's cleared, then essentially the research period opens up and you go from there. So how flexible is the dissertation project? Can it take the shape of applied work and research on creative management and processes? Possible. Really, a lot of this gets decided by and with the supervisor. So it's really, it's really hard, to answer those questions kind of in the abstract. But I would say that if the supervisor feels that this is worthy and that there is, there's a project here that can be supported as a doctoral project, then there's probably no problem with that. So it really kind of depends. I think there's a great deal of flexibility. We also, I think, philosophically are predisposed to think of people doing collaborative work within industries. And that's also, part of the philosophy behind even having a part-time option, for example, where people are still working with some kind of, in some kind of context, in some kind of creative industry of sorts. And so that kind of applied part of it, the applied work, is really, I think, what this practice-based program is about. So I think philosophically, there's a lot of reason to say that's probably just fine. But it really just depends on what it is, right? That's kind of a general sort of thought. But I would say that doing work that is, dealing with, for example, creative management, innovation, those sorts of things, that's really also very much a part of what goes on within the creative school. And so it's relevant to the creative school. It's part of the area that people work in. And so I think that would be, generally speaking, fine. But again, it all depends on what it really is when you get into the nitty gritty.
If I may, actually, just to
Sure.
explain a bit more, put a bit of background behind that. 13 years right now, and I'm working in the video game industry. So I've been working as a game designer for that long, and right now I'm facing the possibility of taking a position as a unit director in the industry. So I see that as an opportunity to work with the creative and really look at the creative process with a scientific lens. So this is where I come from. Obviously, I've been working creatively myself for that long, and I'm looking at a position that's going to be managing a lot of creative people. I'm just wondering if that PhD is something that would allow me to work in that direction and to push me further in that direction as well.
I think so. I think based on what you just said, that's a nice description of a lot of what happens within the creative school in terms of both the creative industries end of things, which is a school within the creative school itself. And there's a number of people working in research in relation to innovation, as that's actually their research area. So there's faculty who would be able to support that. And I think that would be, and also in terms of the gaming industry, we have other faculty who are, working in games and gaming and teaching gaming and all the rest of that. And also some doing kind of more analytic work about games, as a particular social phenomenon. So I think so there's a lot of connection there that, potentially could be drawn upon. And, I think based on what you said, it's not outside the realm of this program to support something like that.
Thank you.
So as an adjunct student, could it be possible to have access to collaborate with a group of students at Ryerson to develop a creative practice process? What might that look like? If Zena, is the question that you're a student somewhere else and you wanted to get in touch with students at Ryerson to do a project together? Is that what you're asking?
No, I mean, if I were in the PhD program and
Yes.
if my research proposal required that I actually work with a group of students at Ryerson,
Oh, I see.
develop the process, is there space to do that maybe within the 7 or 9 different schools there are? And if how would that work? If I were trying to lay that out in my proposal, what would you suggest or not suggest, but what would that look like? If would you just connect with a professor who was interested, and then you might work with a class, or is that even a possible feasible thing? Or
Yeah, I think, again, it's all in the details before we get into it too far. But I think in general, everything you're saying sounds completely possible. First of all, collaboration is something we support and we want to foster. So that means, working with students or groups from within the creative school or even outside of is fine. One of the people who's in the program right now is an arts educator at the AGO. So the, arts education, working with students from around the city, different kinds of community groups, et cetera, is really what that person's research is going to be about. So, so we're interested in collaboration. We're interested in people doing things related to pedagogy and teaching and learning and that sort of thing. And, a lot of people, a lot of faculty at Ryerson use, I don't want to use the word use, but they work with students broadly as part of their research. And even though this is not an education faculty, there are people that are doing stuff that is really about, kind of educational impacts of certain kinds of technologies with certain kinds of groups and that sort of thing. So I would say that that's entirely possible. It doesn't sound outside of the realm at all. And it's actually very productive. I mean, this idea of collaboration is really a strong idea. And it's something that, really is of a piece with this particular program, because as I've been saying over and over, it's an interdisciplinary program. It's a program that draws across the breadth of the creative school. And the PhD cohort and the degree itself is entirely collaborative. We have students collaborating, inside various schools, but then often students will collaborate with each other on things they do together in these various schools. So, so that's completely, I think, within the realm of the program, and I think it would be supported and actually encouraged. Can it be done remotely or online? That's a great question, and a lot of people wonder this, especially, as we're sort of coming out of the COVID thing and we're going back to in-class learning, in-person learning. Is it even possible to do remote learning? I would say the answer to that question is no. The program has been designed as a in-person learning experience, and for all sorts of reasons that make use of the kind of facility and the faculty. And even, as we were just saying, sort of collaborative things that might bring people in contact with other people within the creative school. So it's not really set up as a remote learning thing. Now, this particular cohort, we have the very first one now in their first semester, they are all working remotely because the university is still not fully open for in-person learning. We're transitioning to that for the winter semester. And who knows? I mean, everything going well, we expect that to go on from there. So the program is really designed that way. It's not a remote learning thing. People have to have a residence within the city. Now, in the last 2 years of the program, as you saw, there's no real requirement for classes. Classes are finished by then. People are working much more independently. And I think it might be possible for people to sort of work things out, to be, off campus and out of the city, et cetera. There's a kind of openness there that I think could be much more flexible. But in the first couple of years, the courses will be delivered in class, and the expectation is that students are in class for those classes. So a residency requirement, well, that's really what we're talking about. I mean, there's a residency requirement in the sense that you have to attend classes, and they're expected to be in person. But as I said, I think there's a degree of flexibility possible after the class part of the whole the program of studies is complete, and you're much more into independent research. And there's, I think, probably more flexibility about that. And typically, people will be checking in any number of ways after that with their supervisory team. How many hours a week do you estimate for full time? That's a very good question. It's very really hard to exactly state that, because I think anybody who's been a student knows it's very up and down. Sometimes you're just going all out nonstop for days on end, and other times there's a bit of a lull. But I see the full-time study as a full-time job. So I see that, roughly like a 40-hour-a-week kind of job. As I said, in the first semester, for example, there's only 6 hours of in-class time, but I'm working with, students now that are in that cohort, and they're just going all the time. So if you ask them, they'd say it's a 7-day-a-week job, but it's a full-time thing. It's very busy. And again, it's up and down depending on your ability to work and also the sort of flow of things. Is there any platform that's showing alumni's work? Not yet. So this is the thing about the program. It's brand new. We're in our first semester ever, and the students that are in the program are 7 weeks into a 4-year doctoral degree. So there's not a lot that's been produced to show. We hope to have at the end of the first year a kind of a spring symposium or a mini symposium where the students will be able to produce to give presentations on the research that they're doing. So it'll be it really will be a while before we can actually stand back and have a whole a host of projects and things to point at and say this is what has been produced in the program. So we're in that sort of early stage. But I can tell you they're really interesting people, and they're really doing interesting things, and they're dying to get going on their research. The first semester is largely getting to know the faculty and getting started on things. So they haven't really produced a lot of independent work as of yet, but that's all coming. What else here we have? Would you describe the difference between a PhD program in communication culture and media and design? Okay, well, that's a very good question. We have a program in our university, communication and culture. It's a joint program with York University. It has a master's program as well as a PhD program. And there are some points of crossover between the two, but they're also fundamentally different in terms of structure and purpose. The simple way of putting it is this, that in communication and culture, they essentially, as the title would suggest, it's a kind of, communication theory, cultural theory kind of program, broadly speaking. But they do have within their program the possibility of doing a practice-based demonstration project of some sort. So there is a practice component possible within that program. The difference, though, is that even in communication and culture, the main thing that the dissertation, the primary point of the dissertation is a theoretical paper that may have a practice-based example attached to it, like a case study of some sort or some kind of, creative project, for example. The media and design program reverses that. The primary thing is the creative project, the thing, the demonstration, the object, the artifact, however you define it. And the essay, the kind of more theoretical reflection, is an elaboration and a contextualization of that project. So with the media and design program being wholly practice-based, the practice is the first thing. The writing supports it. Communication culture reverses that. The writing is the main thing. And the practice piece could be a demonstration, it could be an example, it could be a case study, but it's sort of secondary to the theoretical framework that's developed within the dissertation itself. So one is, one has a theory base to it or leads with theory, the other leads with practice. That's, by the way, why sometimes we talk about practice-based programs, but another word or phrase you might hear out there is practice-led, a practice-led doctoral program. And that just means that the practice leads the dissertation. The practice piece is the lead piece in the dissertation. So there are sort of points of crossover, and sometimes people are coming from a master's program in Comm Cult to this program, but they're also fundamentally different. What are the current students doing? Well, again, it's early days, so it's really, there's nothing in terms of a hard, fast, dissertation project to point to. But I did say a few things about that in the presentation. Very diverse. We have people doing things on, innovation within the communication industries. We have a person, you know, investigating disinformation and the kind of algorithms that are, you know, that manipulate consumers of information to certain kinds of, you know, conclusions. You know, like when you Google, when you go to Chapters and you Google a certain book and they say you would probably also like these books. Well, there's algorithms that are sort of, you know, making assumptions and putting things your way based on all of that. So there's one of the students sort of working on some of that, not necessarily in relation to Chapters, but, you know, that kind of thing. In relation to, you know, disinformation, really. There's a person doing a kind of performance-based work on monuments and the Let's Rename Dundas Street initiative. There's a person doing a project on a Quebec seminary and their archives in terms of the history of that seminary within Quebec. There's a person doing work on, you know, arts education. There's somebody else doing something on the Great Lakes and making a film about what would the Great Lakes say if they could talk. There's other people. Let's see. There's a you know, a person doing work on Indigenous fashion and beading and community, and another person doing work on education within you know, minority communities. So that's just really off the top, but this is really very, you know, very early days. These are kind of like projects they proposed as they came in, and once again, we know these things will shift a little bit. So another person's doing something on film technology, really kind of computer-based analysis of how motion within the film industry is recorded, and is proposing, you know, enhanced modes of building that kind of technology. So you've got people doing sort of like really high tech kind of stuff. You have people doing sort of business innovation kind of work. You have people doing really cultural work in all sorts of, you know, contexts, be they educational or more performative contexts. You have people making films and doing web-based work, interactive kind of, you know, web-based projects. For example, I mentioned the archive project, that's going to be an interactive work. So it's really quite all over the place that way. Okay, so, and the backgrounds of those people are, you know, coming from, you know, fine art backgrounds, in some cases, media making backgrounds. We draw people in from the media industries and design industries. We have people who are coming from education in one form or another, and people who are working in, you know, kind of business contexts in some form or another. But for the most part, I would say the people that are drawn to this program are coming from, typically coming from some sort of, you know, applied arts focus, which could be from a master's degree, or it could be from some kind of occupation. And so what about collaborating with programs outside of the creative schools? Absolutely, that's absolutely possible. Again, we really encourage that. So we like that idea of broadband collaboration and working with, you know, sort of diverse communities outside of the school, outside of the university. And is there an option to have a supervisor who's not within or associated with Ryerson? That's a good question, actually. The quick answer is no. You know, the supervisor would be somebody within the creative school. That's fundamental. But on your supervisory committee, you could have people who are outside of the creative school at Ryerson on that committee. And it would be possible to possibly have somebody outside of the university on a committee, but they would not be supervisors. They would not be your supervisors. The supervisor will be from within the creative school. The other thing that happens, just to say, is that when you finally go through the whole process and you come up to your doctoral exam, which we call a defense, you have an external on that defense. So that means somebody who's an expert in the field related to your research is invited in from outside, and they can be from another. Well, they have to be from another university, so they can be from anywhere really. But they're coming in because their expertise is very much related to what you are doing, and so that's where the sort of outside person can come in. And you know, in year 2, can both electives be an internship? Yes. And if so, can these take place in other locations, for example, San Francisco or Montreal? Yes. Well, possibly. First of all, they can both, you can do the 2 electives together as one internship. So you can replace one elective for an internship, or you can replace both of them for a longer internship or for 2 different internships. So there's some real flexibility about that. Can they take place in another location? They can take place in other locations, but again, I don't want to say yes or no to that, because it's very, you know, dependent upon what the research potential of the internship is, and you know, typically your supervisor would be the person who would be arguing for this one way or the other. The whole point of the internship, though, just to say, it's not just to go work someplace because you know it's interesting, or to make some money, or it's not a run-of-the-mill kind of, you know, professional experience somewhere. The internship has to be proposed in such a way that it will advance your research project. So it could be that you want to go, you know, work at this place to do an internship because they're experts in the field that you are researching or that you are working towards in your dissertation. So you would collaborate with them on a project, and you know, it makes a lot of sense that you be in-house for that. So that can be what the internship actually becomes. But it's not just, you know, kind of getting off from taking courses or anything like that. It has to be related to what the actual research project is. And is there a rolling deadline available? No, there isn't. It's the application deadline is the January 18th is the first consideration. As I said, we leave it open until we meet our quota, but you know, if last year was any indication, we met our quota fairly quickly. And so once we meet our quota, we close it. So, and it is, to your point, I think the idea is that it starts in September. We don't have a January start, for example, or a spring start. The year starts in September and the cohort comes in together, and then they go from there. Yes, Swintat.
Yeah, I was kind of gonna go back to the internship replacement. Yeah, I guess I'm kind of not super clear on what an internship is. Like, say if in that kind of example that I have there, like say if there's in Montreal, the Miguel Neuroscience Hospital, and I have a kind of into work there with some of the neuroscientists, but it's really slow stuff to understand. So you kind of have to be there for months to absorb what the hell they're talking about, because I'm not a neuroscientist, but am interested in neural interfaces. So would that be kind of, would that be an internship or a placement? And also, I guess I'm kind of with the next question that's here, how does a residency kind of, you know, say if there's a residency in California to work on stuff from a neuroscience hospital, like is that an internship?
It could be. It could potentially be an internship. I wouldn't really differentiate too much between an internship and a residency, although, you know, one of the key differences might be that internships, there's the possibility of being paid, and residencies, often you have to pay to go to them. But you know, so I think that and we, you know, we don't have a rule about this, but we would encourage host institutions to pay for the students who come into their place of employment as an intern. So either or, the idea of going to some place because there's expertise there that you want to work with, and there's a clear reason to develop something or enhance the dissertation through the expertise that's there within the research group, would be totally relevant, you know, as an idea behind a research internship, and that would be, I think, generally supported. You know, if you're talking about that taking place, you know, in a period when you're not doing other things, you know, could be even in the summertime, or it could be in the fall when there's no classes otherwise, then that could be just fine, I think. And if your supervisor supports it, then generally speaking, I think it would be approved. So I think those kind of things can happen, and people taking residencies would be, you know, one way of thinking about an internship. So in a general sense, yes. But again, it already depends on, you know, it really depends on everything in terms of, you know, what's going to happen there. And largely it depends on your supervisor supporting it. Okay, does artist in residence count? Yeah, that's a very good question. An artist in residence, I suppose so. We you know, again, the program is new. We've never had anyone go on an internship, so these sort of fine details and everything around the internship, you know, we've never actually come up to them and tried to really resolve them. I think the idea, if you were invited to be an artist in residence somewhere, could you call that an internship? Probably. It would be a really wonderful learning experience, I would think. And I think there would likely be enough flexibility to see it that way as equivalent to the internship. So but you know, again, I can't say for sure. It depends on everything in terms of what the residency is and you know what it is, and really largely it would depend on whether your supervisor says it's worthwhile. Lisa, do you have anything on that? Because have you ever seen anything like that come up with the MDM program, for example?
I haven't actually, but it would be an element that we take into consideration. Residency.
Yeah. I mean, in general, I'll just say this, like in terms of the fine details of this versus that, the whole point of the program is to support you in your research. And, you know, so if a case can be made that doing something supports the research, then generally speaking, I think you would find support for that. And we wouldn't be too worried about whether it's called this or that or whatever. If a clear case can be made that this will advance your project and your dissertation and the work behind it, then generally speaking, you'll find people say that they will support it. And I think we want to be that kind of flexible because, you know, there's a million kind of exceptions to things that come up once you really get into things. And, you know, I would hope that we could be that kind of flexible and to really see the value in it.
Blake, there's a question about can the letter of recommendation come from the same supervisor that the applicant picks?
It can, it has. It's sort of, yeah, I would say yes, it can, and it has happened. So that's something to consider. I think that's worthwhile, and it's not unreasonable to say that, because sometimes, for example, we have people applying to the PhD program that did a master's at Ryerson in the creative school in one of the schools, and the people they know, as you know, you know, we are asking for an academic letter of reference, and the academics they know are all in the master's program they just finished. And so it's totally reasonable that they're going to be, you know, calling on those people for letters of reference, and they may also want to be working with them as supervisors. So it can happen. It's just one of those things we you know, we consider, we look at. We don't have a bias against it. Let's just put it that way. But so I would say yes to that question.
And then to submit the letters of recommendation, all we would need at the point of application is the referee's name and contact details, and they will be sent a form in which they're able to write their letters for you. And that's the only thing required at the point of application.
Where are we on our list? Part-time program, could the day job be considered a substitute for the internship? So if you're a part-time student, no, I get you. I think not, because that's like double dipping. You're already working somewhere. To call that your internship, it's kind of like a 2-in-1. I think not. But again, if you were working someplace and there was some unique, I'm just making this up, unique, research opportunity that's coming up, and they're putting together a think tank on something, and it's still in your point of employment, but you want to count that as an internship, probably okay. I don't know. It'd be something your supervisor would have to say is okay, and go on from there. But as a general practice, as a part-time person who's working full-time somewhere else, you couldn't claim the internship as your regular job, because of course the whole idea of the internship is also very much aligned with the whole idea of the elective. It's really to widen your base of knowledge, right? We want you to sort of take on more things. We want you to grow. And so if you're already doing this thing, it's kind of like, is there growth potential there beyond the everyday? Probably not. So it wouldn't be the kind of thing that typically I think you would be supported in. Could you share your research interests and what kind of topics do you supervise? Me. Okay, well, as I mentioned, I teach in the School of Image Arts. My background's in photography, and I come from an artist point of view in photography. My particular interest is really largely sort of based on issues related to landscape, critical landscape, environment, and sort of history memory kind of issues. So I tend to gravitate towards people, or people come to me who want to do work that has to do with memory studies, some kind of historical kind of perspective on things. I'm interdisciplinary in the sense that even though I do come from a photo background per se, I've worked with students who are making films and websites and different forms of media and kind of performative work. So I'm sort of in the sort of art end of things from a photo, film, video kind of perspective for the most part. And my own personal research is, I've got 2 books in the works right now. One's a book I'm co-editing. It's called Place Matters, Critical Topographies in Images and Words. And it's really about landscape from a sort of very wide perspective. And I have another book in the works with a colleague on the Berlin Wall as we call a mobile ruin. We're sort of posing the question, what happens when the wall comes down and is sent adrift across the world and shows up in all sorts of, other places like Truro, Nova Scotia, and many other places. So it's all about the displacement of an icon, and how does that displacement change the meaning of the thing itself as a question of history. So that's a photo video project. And how much is the per fee for part-time program? Daniel, would you like to try to answer that?
Yes, I just put the link there on the chat for
Thanks,
everybody.
Daniel, I was just going to.
Yeah, but basically it varies between domestic students and international students, of course. To understand the tuition for part-time, you basically have to go to the full-time tuition first. So the full-time tuition for the program per year, it's about $8,800, give or take, for domestic students, and about $23,000 for international students. Now, a part-time student will basically pay about half of that. So if you go to the link, I think it's around 4,400 or so. The little tricky part with that is that there is a minimum tuition cost that, regardless if you do the part-time or full-time student program, you have to pay that tuition, right? So for example, we recommend the full-time option is a 4-year option. So you'll pay the $8,800 basically 4 years, so you give or take 32. over the 4-year period. If you're doing this as a part-time student, you'll be paying basically about half of that per year, which is about 4,000. And like Blake mentioned, we usually recommend part-time students to finish within 6 years. Now, if you do the math on that, there's basically a discrepancy of tuition. So that difference of tuition cost, you basically, before you graduate, you'll have to pay that difference, right? So basically, it's a standard cost for the program. It just sort of, depending how you do it, if you do it in 6 years, it doesn't balance out. So at the end of the 6th year, you'll have to pay whatever the difference might be, $5,000, $10,000, you know, something around there. If you do it in 7 years, it'll be a little bit less. If you do it in 8 years, which is basically the exact same as twice the 4-year standard, then you basically end up paying your tuition throughout the part-time, your part-time stay in the program. So hopefully that kind of gives you an idea. And yeah, the link I put on the chat will have the actual breakdown with the numbers for you guys. Keep in mind the numbers change every year based on whatever the government says. So right now, this year, those are the numbers. Next year may go up and down a little bit, but it just gives you an idea of the total cost for your program.
Somebody was asking, is there a session for the faculty to share their expertise? We're not holding that as a session, but what you can do is go to the website and look at the faculty page, and the bios of all the faculty members are there. And they give a fairly clear indication of what their research interests are. So going back to that question about finding a faculty member to supervise your research and to support you in your application, I think the very first step is to go to that faculty page, just read them. And then, you know, make notes on the ones that are most applicable to what you think you want to do, and then reach out to them. And as I said at the beginning, the faculty are there because they want to work with students. They're very excited about the program. They want to work within the program as supervisors, so they're highly motivated, I would say. And they're ready to, and they expect you to reach out to them. So they all know what the process is. So it won't be like a, whoa, who are you? What's this about? They understand what the process is. So they'll understand why you're reaching out to them. And so do so, and just explain to them that you're, you know, interested in applying to this program. Your research involves this sort of topic, and you see a faculty member is engaged with, and you would want, you know, would love an opportunity to have a Zoom chat or something like that, and to see, you know, talk about the research and to maybe think about supervising. I would ask for a meeting rather than just out of the blue send an email saying, here's my CV, would you supervise me? I get a lot of those. You know, I look at them, but I feel like it's really hit and miss. I would take the time to sort of reach out and to, you know, more properly, you know, ask for a conversation or a phone call or something like that. At least give a chance to the person a chance to sort of find out a little bit about you that goes beyond what can be found on a CV. Here's a question about the dissertation defense panel. How many members will be in the panel? Okay, that's a very good question. Essentially, there's 5 members and also 1 chair on the defense panel. So the way it works is that you have your supervisor. You start with your supervisor in the first year. Typically, by the 2nd year, you work with the supervisor to put together a supervisory committee, which is 3 people, the supervisor and 2 others. And those 2 others are typically within the creative school, but it could be outside of the school that the supervisor is located in. And that's your supervisory committee. It's also your comprehensive committee. They're the people that will work with you and examine the comprehensive exams that you do. And they're the people that will approve your dissertation proposal. Once that's done, you're working on your research and everything, and then you come up eventually to the defense itself. So those 3 people are also going into the defense with you, but you have 2 more people that are added. One's called the internal external, which is internal to Ryerson, external to the school, to the faculty. So it might be someone from, you know, psychology or literature or engineering. It really depends on what your project is and what your research interests are. And then there's the external that I mentioned before, which could be, which is an expert in the field relevant to what your research is about. So those are the 5 people that are really examining you and examining your dissertation, I should say. It's not a personal thing. And then there's a chair, and the chair is just an independent faculty member that's assigned by the graduate school to chair that particular exam. So they're sort of a neutral third party, but they're very important because they kind of govern the procedure and make sure everything's above board and everyone's treated with respect and proper protocols are followed. So will it be all right to reach out to a potential supervisor to discuss broader research idea? Yeah, absolutely. Have to run, thank you. Well, thank you. And research and innovation section of the Creative School website, there's an example that Daniel has put up. Other questions? We seem to be running low on questions, but we've had a lot and we've talked a lot. Well, I have. There may be some last ones. How frequently do supervisors and students meet? That's a good question. It's really variable. It depends on the personalities involved and really what the needs are. I'll just say this, that typically what happens is that when the student is starting in the first year, they're quite busy with coursework and they may not really have much to meet about. They're just really kind of working through. Where the supervisor really kicks in is in the first year at the point at which the directed reading comes into it, which is in the summertime or spring at the end of the first year. Because the student will work with the supervisor to put together a reading list that's related to the student's research topic, but is also typically drawing out of the supervisor's research expertise. I mean, that's why the student has picked that person to work with. And so they're working together on that. So that becomes a point of more intense, I would say, meetings and deliberations together. And then as it goes along, it kind of people, depends on what their needs are. I mean, for me, working with doctoral students as a supervisor, I like to sort of check in maybe once a month to know what's going on so that we'll have a meeting. But at other times it can be more than that because we're working on things. We're working on the dissertation. I'm reading drafts of the essays. I'm giving them feedback. They're coming back a couple of weeks later with a new draft. So it kind of goes back and forth a lot more. So it really kind of is variable that way. And so I always say to the students, I'm available to meet with you when you need to meet. And I kind of let them sort of set the tone that way. But other faculty and other students are much more sort of meeting on a more regular basis. Some faculty are working with students in their labs. They might have a research assistantship, so they see them every day. So it's all over the place that way. Any other questions?
Sorry, I can't figure out how to raise the hand on that. Actually, it's about the recommendation from a professor and the creative sample. As I mentioned, I've been working in the industry for more than 13 years, reaching out to professors, which I've studied with during my master's, might be hard, actually. Some of them might be impossible to find. And again, the creative sample being in an industry that is very strong on industrial secret, it couldn't go further than what is public, which is mostly the final products here, on which I've worked and contributed a lot, but won't be my personal unique work. It will be a teamwork. Mm-hmm. How do these things fit in the requirements?
Yeah, okay, that's a good question and a tricky one, because of, as you said, because of the proprietary issues related to, research and development that might be private. And then also the fact that research is often within a team context. If it's a project that you've worked on as part of a team, it's really important for you to tell us, and this would be in the statement of intent, what it is you did on that project, what your role was, right? So that gives us a context for understanding what we're seeing in the way of the sample that you submit. And that's really important, and something a lot of people don't do. I've sat on so many committees where we're looking at some massive project, building a community somewhere, and someone says, yeah, I worked on it. Well, what part of it? That's a really big thing. So, we need to know what the role was. So that is something that has to be stated. And of course, if it's private, if it's, kind of research that can't be disseminated, you'll have to find some other way of bringing that into it. So it really is kind of, everyone's situation is going to be different that way. You'll find your solution, For us, the most important thing is to know not so much the details of like what actually you did, at that sort of granular level. It's more to know what your interests are and how the thing that you're putting forward might represent those interests, or give us a kind of view into what those interests are, and what kind of, how you've mobilized your background to pursue certain kinds of questions, and these are examples of that. So I think those would be the ways. That's maybe the way to think about it. Not so much in the divulging of secrets, so much as giving an indication of the kinds of experiences you've had within the industries and within the research community that you work from, and how those things are relevant to what it is you might want to do within the program. And that can be sort of a bit more generalized that way. So as not to, kind of get yourself into trouble with the divulging secrets or anything like that, but you're giving a clear indication of really where you're coming from.
Thank you. And sorry about the first part of my question. I realized it was kind of two questions in one. About the recommendation letter from a professor, as I mentioned in 2008, I might not be able to find these professors. They might not remember any of my work.
Right.
Is there alternatives to that in potential peers, seniority in the industry, or something that is outside of the academic world?
I think it's possible, and we have seen that. As I said, we do ask for the academic reference for sort of good reason. If it's absolutely impossible to find those people or to have that reference, or if it's completely irrelevant at this point, you studied something long ago that's got absolutely nothing to do with what it is you're proposing and what you've done with your working career, you can make that case in the statement of intent, saying that I've put forward these two these two referees because they know my work and know the context that I'm working in, and in that case, it really is important for you to tell the referees what the context is about, because sometimes what happens is when we have kind of collegial references from people that you're working from, they don't really know what to talk about. They sort of tend to sort of talk about, oh, is so-and-so's a really great guy, and that's totally irrelevant to us. I mean, we really want to know what kind of strengths do you have in your background and how they might be relevant to doctoral study. And that's what, most academics understand when they write a reference letter, and that's why they're good at it. And that's why they're preferred. So as long as you make it clear to the people who are writing the reference letters, what kind of things, why we have reference letters and what they might say, then that might help you to get better reference letters. Because really, I'm being completely frank, I've seen a lot of applications go soft when the reference letters are just very, very general and not really in any particular way written in a context that makes sense within an academic environment.
Perfect. Thank you very much.
Sure. Any last questions? And don't forget, you know, Lisa and I are happy to talk about things in the future via email. We can have Zoom chats one-on-one. We're very open and very available. So it doesn't all have to be tonight, but you know, we have a bit more time if anyone has a last question. Yeah, it looks like, if not, there we go. Okay, if not, that's totally great. Very nice to meet you all. Very much looking forward to seeing applications. As I said, if you have follow-up questions, we're available to answer them. And thank you for coming out.
The Creative School.